porque lo veremos a continuación, los seres humanos necesitamos creer en que nuestras acciones tienen una importancia, que trascienden y que impactan a mucha gente. Y seguramente no hay nadie mejor para explicarnos este asunto que nuestra siguiente invitada, Hayley Rushing, que es la cofundadora de The Purpose Institute, que se dedica exclusivamente a ayudar a las organizaciones que confían en ellos. Rush mencionaba el ejemplo de Southwest Airlines, y hay otras tantas empresas, Timberland, Vans, quien no tuvo unos zapatos Vans, de North Face o las universidades de Texas y de Arizona, y les ha ayudado a descubrir ese propósito superior empresarial. Hayley es coautora del libro It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For, Why Every Extraordinary Business is Driven by Purpose, que fue bestseller del Wall Street Journal durante varias semanas y que nos acompaña en esta mañana para guiarnos en el proceso de encontrar nuestro propósito superior empresarial. Hayley, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the video, and the time is yours. Hello, Hayley. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, perfectly.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so delighted to be here with everybody today and work with my dear friend Raj to talk today about the power of purpose and how to actually lead and create a purpose-driven organization. We actually have a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to be talking about why purpose matters, just why bother building a purpose-driven organization in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit about some things on how to actually discover your purpose and articulate it. We're going to talk about how to bring it to life in the running of your business, and then finally how to measure it. So I'm just going to jump right in because that is a lot of ground to cover. And I wanted to start by just talking about why purpose matters. Why dedicate your time and your talent and your energy to creating a purpose-driven business? I'm going to look at it from a couple of dimensions. The first being that human beings fundamentally need purpose. Then we'll talk about how employees actually thrive when they're working in the service of a purpose they believe in. We'll talk about its impact on leadership and how leaders actually lead more effectively when there's clarity of purpose. We'll talk about the growing expectations in society for corporations to be a part of the solutions to the problems facing our world. And then we'll look at how results actually support purpose. So the idea that purpose is in any way in conflict with high performance is not true. The data is pretty clear that when you are very intentional about building a purpose-driven business, the marketplace tends to reward you. So we'll look at some of that. So let's dive right in with looking at the human fundamental need for purpose and meaning. I'm going to take you back to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, which you're probably familiar with from a college psychology course or something. But it basically talks about how human beings have a set of fundamental needs. So there's certainly the need for the things that we need for basic survival, air and water and food and shelter. There's the things we need to feel secure in life in terms of property ownership and employment and resources. There's the need to feel a sense of belonging in terms of social networks and relationships. And there's a need for esteem, for respect and status and some kind of power. Those are all very fundamental needs. All of those needs tend to be more self-oriented, so they are designed to help give the individual what they need in order to kind of flourish and thrive. It's not until you get to the very top, which Maslow would argue is one of the fundamental drivers of human fulfillment, is this need for self-actualization. It's the need to actually feel like you're using your talents to contribute to the betterment of the world. You're actually making meaningful contributions in the world. And that's when you see this kind of flip from a self-orientation at the bottom of the pyramid to a more selfless orientation. It's kind of ironic, you get to self-actualization through self-transcendence. It's like, I almost think of it as at the bottom of the pyramid, you're kind of filling your own cup, and then you reach a point where your cup just wants to run over, and you have stuff to give back into and be of service to the world. And what we've learned too, it's kind of interesting from a human motivation standpoint, is those lower order needs, they're very motivating to a point, but as soon as you have a basic level of security, basic level of status, you have a certain number of relationships, it actually ceases to be very motivating. You kind of reach your threshold or your satiation point. And so it's kind of like, think about it in your own life, like how many pairs of shoes can you have? How many cars can you have? How many titles can you have? It kind of reaches a threshold. Whereas at that highest level, when human beings get a taste of making a difference in the world, that actually becomes something that perpetuates itself. You actually want more of it. You don't say, I made a difference in someone's life, I'm done with that. You actually want to do more and more of it. And we've actually found that the more people pursue purpose and meaningful contribution, the higher life satisfaction that they have. So you can think about the things that motivate people. There's kind of a bucket of what we would call extrinsic aspirations. And by extrinsic, they're kind of those external things. It's money and status and recognition and material goods. And then there's intrinsic aspirations, people who are motivated to help others improve their lives or to contribute in meaningful ways. And what they've done long-term studies where they took groups of college kids and they separated them out based on the types of aspirations they had. And they followed those kids for 10 years. And what they did is they went back 10 years later, and for those people that were motivated by those external, kind of more bottom of the pyramid things, money, status, and who had actually achieved those things. And they said, what impact did that have on your life? And what they found was when you spend your life pursuing those extrinsic things, you actually don't gain much in terms of life satisfaction. That control group had similar levels of life satisfaction as they did in college. But interestingly, they actually had higher levels of anxiety and depression. So it turned out that actually successfully getting those things that you thought would make you happy didn't turn out to be as satisfying and fulfilling as you had thought they would. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience in your life. I know I certainly have, that when I got to a certain level or had gotten a certain house or whatever it was, and I thought, this is the ticket. And then you're kind of left thinking, is this really all there is? And so there's often a shift where people will say, okay, I've done that, I've tried that path, and now I'm going to be motivated and driven by something a little more meaningful. And what they found with the people who pursued those things is they had much higher levels of life satisfaction and well-being and much lower levels of anxiety and depression. So it's not only a driver of life satisfaction, but it actually helps kind of serves as almost a prophylactic on a lot of mental illness and anxiety and depression and things like that. Which brings me to my last point. I think a lot of times there is a misunderstanding that purpose is something to be pursued only when all of those other lower order needs are met. So in essence, you have to have all these other things met before you can even have the luxury of thinking about purpose and contribution. And I know Raj has spoken with you about Viktor Frankl, and what he found is that that's actually not the case, that purpose is actually the thing that will help see you through even the worst of times. Even when you have nothing else to go on, oftentimes it's your sense of meaning, that you have a reason to go on. This was from his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, where he was quoting Nietzsche, and he said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Whenever there was an opportunity for it, one had to give the concentration camp prisoners a why, an aim for their lives in order to strengthen them to bear the terrible how of their existence. Woe to him who saw no more sense in his life, no aim, no purpose, and therefore no point in carrying on. He was soon lost. And that was what that book was about, was essentially the power of purpose to help see people through what is arguably one of the greatest human suffering circumstances that one could endure. And so you think about the times that we're living in today. This year has created such uncertainty and unease for so many people. And as leaders of businesses, you actually have the opportunity to give people a sense of meaning amidst all of this suffering. What are we here to do? Why do we stay engaged and committing daily to giving our talents in the service of our work? What is it all for? So to me, that's one of the most fundamental, joys in life, is being in a position where you can actually create meaningful workplaces that satiate this fundamental human need for purpose and meaning in life. And this isn't just an altruistic endeavor. There are actual enormous benefits that accrue from having a meaningful workplace in terms of employee engagement. So there have been a lot of studies that look at the impact on employee engagement when people are working in the service of a purpose that they believe in. Probably the most notable would be Gallup. Gallup has been studying employee engagement for decades. Thousands of companies, millions of employees around the world. And what they've found is that there are about 12 essential ingredients of a highly engaged workforce. Now, all of these are important. So purpose is not a panacea that makes everything okay, but assuming a lot of these other more traditional measures are in place, like people are clear and prepared, they feel respected and valued, they have opportunities to grow. One of the things that Gallup has found is often missing is this, what they call Q8, is that sense that what they're working for a company. Does the purpose of your company make you feel your job is important? And what they've found is when that score is really low, it has a massive impact on engagement. So companies without a sense of purpose, they only have about 23% of their employee base fully engaged. Whereas when you have a really strong sense of purpose, that goes up significantly to about 73% of your workforce is engaged. And why is engagement important? Why do you even care about employee engagement? Employee engagement is basically the dynamic that ensures you have high-performing people, you have loyal people. It translates to better customer service. It translates to lower absenteeism. It translates to lower safety errors and things like that. So having an engaged workforce is incredibly important to having a high-performing, productive workplace. And a subsequent study that was done by Dan Pink, he actually did a meta-analysis of pretty much, dozens, if not hundreds, of studies that looked at human motivation. And he was really questioning the old incentives that companies tend to use to try to motivate people, like, how about this bonus? How about this incentive? How about this promise of a promotion? And what he found was that those kind of worked in the industrial age when things were much more systematic and what we were asking people to do. But in an age in kind of a creative class, information-based economy, what really drives people are three factors: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So again, think about this in your own life. Autonomy. Have you ever worked somewhere where you felt totally controlled and micromanaged all day long? And compare that with, how does it feel when you go to work every day and you feel control of your day, you can self-manage your work? Mastery, same thing. Do you feel like you're in a position where you're doing what you're great at and you're getting better every single day? Or do you feel like you're kind of stagnating and not growing in any meaningful way? And then the third factor is this factor of purpose. You might have all the autonomy and be using your strengths, but if you're in a company that you don't actually believe in what it is they're doing, the fulfillment doesn't last very long. So you want to feel like your work matters and it's making a positive difference in the world. The holy grail is to have all three of these in place within an organization. But again, purpose is often a missing factor. So humans need it, employees thrive on it, great leaders lead with purpose. Probably the most popular and dynamic speaker on the topic of purpose-driven leadership would be Simon Sinek, when he wrote Start With Why, and he had this very simple concept of the golden circle, where he said most leaders are very good at talking about what they do. You can give a literal description of kind of, here, we make these widgets, and they can often talk about how they do them, kind of what their unique approach to doing business with. But the great leaders are the ones that can speak and touch to people's hearts and minds about why they're doing it, why they're in business in the first place, why they exist beyond making money. So I think about Walt Disney comes to mind, who he was such a visionary in terms of thinking about this enormous human capacity for imagination and creativity. And his why that drove everything Disney ever did was to use our imaginations to bring happiness to millions. Now, that's the biggest thing. They're in the Disney is unequivocally in the happiness business. Now, how they do that? They do it with amusement parks. They do it with movies. They do it with merchandising. They do it with streaming services now. You know, what they do is create content and experience, but why they do it explains everything. Why they do it is to use the human capacity for imagination to bring happiness to millions. And so when you have that why, when it's very clear as a leader, you know why you're there, it gives everyone in your organization kind of an implicit marching order. When they show up every day, they know what they're there to do. Now, it's very surprising to me just how few people actually know their company's why. So again, Gallup asked this question: I know what my company stands for and what makes us different from our competitors. And I find these numbers shocking. Only about a third of employees showing up every day say they know what their company stands for. Now, if your frontline employees don't know what you stand for, how in the world are they going to translate anything meaningful to your customers? Managers, it's about half. And executives, this one I found very shocking. So at the highest level of a company, only 60% said, I really know what my company stands for. That's shocking to me. That number should be 100% at the executive level if you want any chance of it trickling and cascading down to the rest of the organization. And Herb Kelleher, who was one of my mentors for 20 years, he was the founder of Southwest Airlines, very visionary, very purpose-driven. He was like, I don't know how leaders lead without purpose. Like, if you don't have a purpose, then it requires a manual this thick telling people exactly what you want them to do. But if people know what the purpose of the company is, it liberates them from overly prescriptive manuals and hyper-vigilant management, because they can look at everything that they're about to do and ask themselves, is this in alignment with our purpose or not? And so it makes leading actually, in some ways, much easier. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is this growing expectation in society. Society is increasingly expecting and needing corporations to have a higher purpose beyond making money. You know, for decades now, we've been working under the business philosophy of this gentleman, Milton Friedman, who said the only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize profits. Now, that has been a devastating idea in modern business history, because it's led to serving the shareholder at the expense of almost everyone else in the system. And beyond that, I think it's incredibly unimaginative and uninspiring view of business. It completely overlooks the power of business to change things for the better for everyone. And I think it also underappreciates the human spirit, which is wired to contribute in meaningful ways. And I think it's just not good business. And so the good news is, in the last decade, we have just seen an explosion of deeper thinking about the role of business in society. So about 15 years ago, Roy and I wrote our book, It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For. And that was just born out of our simple observation that the highest performing, most beloved brands in the world, Southwest Airlines, Whole Foods, BMW, John Deere, these were all of our clients. They didn't get that way because they had a great ad agency, although we would have liked to have given ourselves a pat on the back. They got that way because they had visionary leaders who had built businesses that actually made a meaningful difference in the lives of the people that they served. Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, I've talked about that, talked about the power of knowing why you exist beyond making money. And then we've just had an explosion of great thinking around conscious capitalism, creative capitalism, inclusive capitalism, the purpose economy. And my favorite book of last year was The Healing Organization, where Raj has already shared with you that there should almost be a meta purpose of every organization that is to heal the suffering that they have the capacity to heal within their ecosystem. So we are seeing this shift in thinking about business as this dynamic, creative force for addressing big problems that exist in the world, and doing it in a way that actually is profitable as well. And again, society increasingly expects business to act as a force for good. That old adage that if you're not part of the solution, you're a part of the problem, I think is very true today. We see almost 100% of people believe that brands have a responsibility to make positive change in the world. Over half of people are willing to boycott brands based on their position on a social or political issue. And we see about half of people feeling like the brands have more power to solve social ills than governments do. Now, that one's really interesting to me because I think one of the things we see is that as confidence in institutions declines, people are looking for alternative sources of power to solve problems. And I think that's one of the things driving the expectation of businesses to step up and help solve some of the complex problems facing our world today. I wanted to share, I'm going to play a video from this gentleman who's the former CEO of a company called DSM. And I love his belief statement summarized in this quote: "You cannot be successful nor call yourself successful in a society that fails." So this, again, kind of myopic view that, well, we're successful, we're financially successful with turning a blind eye towards the environmental devastation that might be being left in your wake, or the toll it's taking on suppliers in the supply chain, or what's happening with your employees' well-being, that's just no longer a viable definition of success. And so this is a little bit of a long video, but I wanted to let you hear it directly from him because he tells the journey of how they went from a very traditional profit-driven business that really didn't think about deeper purpose at all. He shares his own personal epiphany and awakening that he had when he was confronted with the reality of the world in which he's operating, and then how that led them to this very meaningful, purposeful, and profitable journey for the company. So I'll have the video play now.
We live in a nice world with an enormous amount of inequality. Less than 1% of the world having as much as 99% of the world. The billion richest people in the world, and many of us belong to that group, claiming that they can consume, because they do, 45% of global resources and produce 45% of global waste, leaving almost the other 50% to the other 6, later on 8 billion people. Is that fair? I've traveled with many of the people from the UN in Somalia, Ethiopia, Bangladesh. At a certain moment in a village where people are dying of the shortage of food, a mother handed over her youngest child to me, and before you knew, I was standing there with the child in my arms. The two words that the lady spoke, two words which are with me for the rest of my life, said, "You know." And I was standing there and said, "I don't know anything. I mean, what do I know? You know, when you come back in 2 years from now, I don't have 6 children anymore. You've been here in this village. You know, I know, even stronger, the world knows." The two words, "you know," is so true. We know what is happening. And if you then, as a company, have the abilities, if you have that, then you must use it. We were ever one of the most polluting industries or companies in the world. We transitioned from a coal mining company to a bulk chemical company. Later on, the late 90s, there was a debate in DSM whether a new transition was needed to a more greener form of chemistry. DSM acquired the biggest biotech company in the Netherlands. That's the way I came involuntarily into DSM. Being in DSM, we started the discussion with my predecessor, myself, and some of my colleagues. Will we be successful as a bulk chemical company? And my belief, maybe I was not totally objective being a biologist, my belief and my colleagues was, we will not be successful on the long run as a chemical company, a bulk chemical company. 2008, I was just CEO, and some people, especially the financial world, asked, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Contributing to a better society and make the company very successful." And people said, "Well, I hear two messages. Successful company, that's very good, by the way. And improving the world, it's not your task." You're not a charity foundation, which is correct. So you need to make profit as a company. You need to take care of your shareholders, which is all correct. They are wrong, in my opinion, to say that it is not our responsibility to leave a better world behind. So we entered into a new transformation, but wasn't easy. 2008, the world went into a crisis. Share prices down, profit down. Our share price dropped tremendously. We had also one time a shareholders meeting where some shareholders stood up and said, should we continue with all that stuff? And I said, yeah, but it costs money. I said, yeah, but it's our responsibility. Even stronger, I think it's your responsibility also as a shareholder that our company does that. Our company owned by you, or you are invested in our company. And at a certain moment, there was a lady standing up and said, but I think it's good what he's doing. I think this is exactly our responsibility. This is the company I want to invest in. We as a company look to ourselves. Apparently we are good now in nutrition, we are good in understanding malnutrition, we are good in addressing climate change with new energies, etc. So especially in the field of climate, in the field of hunger and food, in the field of circular economy, in those domains, we can have a lot of impact. I think in 10 years from now, people will find out that those two things, doing well, doing good, must go hand in hand together. Otherwise, people don't work for your company anymore, people don't buy your products anymore, you lose your license to operate. Sometimes I predict already, looking back, sitting there with my wife and my two boys, and I don't want to regret. And if my two boys then will ask, oh, you were CEO of a big company and what did you do with your life? I hope I will not discuss only EBITDA or share price or the profit, etc. And I hope to be able to say something like, we inherited the world in a certain status from our parents. We lived well, we enjoyed it, but we also tried to deal responsibly with the world and improving it a little bit and handing it over to you that you can continue that journey and live happily here together with your children. And I realize I need to act now to be able to tell that story which I want at that moment in time. That drives me, I think.
Haley, you have to unmute your microphone, Haley. You mute your microphone. Okay, yes. You're still on mute, I think. Still. Can someone unmute her from? No. Entonces, mientras Haley.
Okay, maybe I can. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. Now, do I need to share my screen again? Or can you see it?
I think you have to share it again. Yes.
We got it.
You have it? Okay. Perfect. Am I good? You can hear me and you can see my screen and everything?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
You're fine.
Great. Thank you. Sorry for that little snafu, but I appreciate you watching the whole thing. I just think he's a perfect testimony of the purposeful journey to going from a traditional way of business to this much more fulfilling, as well as high-performing way of being. And so that's my last point about why become purpose-driven. Purpose is a driver of performance. Over 2,000 academic studies have examined the impact of environmental, social, and governance propositions on equity returns, and 63% found positive results, with only 8% being negative. Raj has talked a lot with you about purpose being a driver of high performance and has really studied this in depth. And I think probably one of the first testimonies to the power of purpose to build long-lasting, high-performing organizations was in Jim Collins' book, where he found that organizations driven by purpose and values outperformed comparison companies 6-1 by looking at stock market performance. Now, when Raj came along and said, well, not just any purpose, but a higher order purpose that's more of a noble purpose, a heroic purpose, a healing purpose, and operates with a multi-stakeholder model where you're thinking about how do I fulfill the promise of my purpose while simultaneously creating value for every stakeholders, those do even better. They outperform conventional competitors 8-1. And then we see a host of benefits that accrue from having purpose: revenue growth, job creation, stock price growth, profit performance. They're all significantly higher in values-driven organizations. Now, the trick is, it's not enough to just have a purpose and a set of values. You actually have to live them and you have to bring them to life. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So these benefits and the performance only follows when purpose is embraced and when it's activated in the company in meaningful ways. So that's my setting the stage for why purpose. So I want you to think in your own perspective, what's the most compelling reason to become a purpose-driven organization? I just talked about humans need it, employees thrive on it, society expects it, leaders lead better with it, performance ensues from it. So from your own stake, if you want to take a second in the chat room and just make a note of, for you personally, what's really resonating and what feels like makes a great case for becoming purpose-driven is, what is it for you? This is going to be one of the questions that you'll be asked to explore when you go to your breakout rooms. It's always interesting to see how people come to the purpose journey and for what reasons, because there's a multitude of reasons for building purpose-driven business. So think about that, because that'll be one of your topics. All right, so let's talk a little bit about purpose discovery. How do you actually, if you don't already have a purpose in place, how do you actually go about the process of uncovering it? I have this picture because purpose really is an inside-out job in many ways. You need to get inside your organization, figure out what's in the hearts and minds of your people that could be harnessed and utilized in the service of making an impact in the world. There's a quote from Aristotle, very simple, that informs a lot of our work. He says, where your talents and the needs of the world cross, there lies your purpose. Where your talents and the needs of the world cross, there lies your purpose. One tool that we've developed, we call it the Purpose Venn, which is kind of the building blocks of purpose, really looks at, you can think about your talents is the combination of your strengths, what are you built to do, and your passions, what do you love to do? And then how do you harness those two to make a meaningful impact? What does the world need you to do? So let me just go through these real quickly. Like when you think about your strengths, what was the company originally founded to do? We do a lot of work with GE. GE was founded by Thomas Edison, arguably one of the greatest innovators of all time. So every single purpose statement within that company has some nod back to their innovation heritage, that they're here to pioneer something, innovate something that will help enhance the common good. What do you have the authority in? What do you have the potential to be the best in the world at? When you really look at all the things you do, there's often some little gem that's like, this is where we really shine and knock it out of the park. So you can go back and maybe look at some of your most historic successes and then try to deconstruct those. And what was at the heart of those successes? So we really look at that because this is what gives you the confidence to know what it is that you can do. Like we actually have the capabilities and wherewithal to solve this problem. Now your passions, what do you love to do? What is it that motivates you? What do you find gratifying and rewarding? Think about the moments in your work life that you've just taken great pride in. And then you also want to make sure you're looking at passions within the context of your organization. So you might be passionate about growing people or building teams. That would be true at any company you were probably at. So you're trying to identify what are those things you're deeply passionate about that the organization that you're in uniquely enables you to do. So for example, you might be passionate about lifting people up, but what about your current organization enables you to do that or realize that passion in a particular way? Do you work with people who are typically underappreciated or undervalued? And so you have a particular gift within this organization for that passion. So you're trying to root it specifically in the work of the organization. And then lastly, what does the world actually need you to do? So are there big industry problems that need to be tackled or pressing societal issues that you could build a business to solve? And I'm going to share with you kind of a different take on the stakeholder model. I know Raj and Neha will be taking you through the stakeholder model in subsequent sessions where you're looking at how do we do business in a way that creates value for every stakeholder. But another way that you can, as a tool to try to identify where you can make a meaningful contribution, is to go through your ecosystem of stakeholders and try to identify the need or the problem or suffering that might exist that you could actually say our purpose of our business is to solve that. So let me give you a couple examples. And Raj worked very closely, wrote the book with Bob Chapman, who is the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller. And Barry Waymiller is a conglomeration of kind of mid-size industrial manufacturing companies that don't have anything necessarily super noble about the products that they're producing. They're necessary, but they're not necessarily inherently noble or meaningful products. And what he noticed, he had 3 personal epiphanies. One is he's a man of faith. He goes to church and he noticed that like his pastor has people for 1 hour and they leave there inspired and uplifted and feeling better. Whereas he has them for 40 hours. So he should be able to uplift them a whole lot. He noticed that when people come to work, they usually are pretty happy, but then when they punch their ticket, all of a sudden he noticed they were not feeling so good. Their joy kind of dissipated when they checked in. And he also had this epiphany at a friend's wedding when he saw his friend giving his daughter away at the altar to the future son-in-law. And he thought, you know, everyone is someone's precious child that they're entrusting to others to care for. So with those kind of 3 epiphanies, he's like, I'm going to create a company where we are going to measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, primarily his own employees. And so a quote from him, we care for people like family and create workplaces where everybody matters. So for him, the company, the purpose of the company is an employee-inspired purpose. This was a big evolution in both Raj and our thinking in what is the nature of a purpose, because I think historically people think your purpose has to be a customer-facing purpose. There are tons of great examples of customer-facing purposes, but it's also legitimate to say we're going to create a business with the purpose of improving the lives of our employees. You might actually look at your suppliers. Could you make an impact in the lives of suppliers who are largely out of sight and out of mind? There's a great series on Netflix called Rotten, and it looks at all of the human rights abuses that exist within the supply chain of foods like avocados, chocolate, wine, and things like that. Tony's Chocolonely is a chocolate brand that their fundamental purpose is to end modern slavery and illegal child labor in the chocolate industry. So I wasn't aware of it until I'd seen the documentary, but there is an enormous amount of child slave labor within the chocolate supply chain or cocoa supply chain. There's not a living wage. There's all kinds of issues with it. So he's basically built a community of cocoa farmers in this region in Africa where they have a living wage. They have access to healthcare, childcare. They have college pathways to college and kind of economic empowerment. And it's just a beautiful model. And he's like, the world doesn't need another bar of chocolate. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of brands of chocolate in the world, but could I create a bar of chocolate that actually helps solve this fundamental problem? And they're very profitable, successful, kind of micro boutique chocolate brand. Another way to think about, could you build a business to solve societal problems that impact your community? This is a gentleman named George Taylor. He's in North Carolina. He was watching the news one night and heard a story about a 16-year-old boy who was shot and killed in a gang violence about 2 streets away from where George lived. And he had no idea that gang violence was even that big of a problem in his community. He's a serial tech entrepreneur, but when he called some friends of his, the superintendent of the police, and started investigating what's at the root of gang violence and gun violence in our community, it all came down to economic opportunity. That in the absence of having economic opportunity and opportunity to actually get to know one another, it facilitated a level of violence and territorial things that was all very dysfunctional and was causing much suffering in the community. So he started True Colors Brewing. He said, our business is to brew great beer, but our purpose is to bring rival gang members together to resolve conflicts and stop gun violence. And within 1 year of his operation, gang violence was down by 90%. It's kind of interesting. One of the rules that he has is you're not allowed to leave your gangs. You actually have to stay in your gangs, because that's the way that the new relationships and new communication skills are going to make their way back into the community. And finally, another stakeholder is obviously the planet. Could you step up to save the planet? So there are a lot of examples. Tesla, we'll talk about some others. Patagonia is one who's been a pioneer on this front, and they say real clear, our purpose is to save our home planet. Some of the first advertising they've ever done was a campaign to talk about what they're doing to fight for our public lands. And they were very explicit about their opinions about what the president was doing to the public lands. They've also been a real pioneer in the circular economy and creating new models for how apparel gets used, recycled, upcycled. This ad of "Don't buy this jacket" is a great example of that. So all of that is to say, really think deeply about where you can make the most impact. It doesn't just have to be the customer. It could be anywhere in your ecosystem, any stakeholder. And at the intersection of these, when you know what you're built to do, what do you love to do, and what the world needs to you, that's where your purpose is just going to start to emerge in a beautiful, clear, inspiring way. I will say that why you exist, your purpose tends to be more informed by the impact you're trying to make and the kind of passion of your people. Strengths you need, but strengths is what really ensures you can fulfill the purpose, that you actually have the capabilities and wherewithal to make good on the promise of your purpose. Okay, so when you're thinking about your purpose, and if you don't have your purpose already, really think about what's the most meaningful problem that you have both the talent and the tenacity to solve. And again, if you've already cracked the code and you know what problem you're built to solve, that's fantastic. That's hopefully that's at the heart of your purpose statement. But again, if you want to put in the chat room just for your own organization, what's the most meaningful problem that it might not be reflected in your purpose now, but that you could step up and solve? That's kind of what we want to get you thinking about. That'll help you get clarity of what your purpose is. Okay, so once you kind of have a sense of that, then it comes to actually putting pen to paper and articulating your purpose. So I'm going to give you a few little principles that we've learned over the years of how to write a great purpose statement. And when we say a purpose statement, real simply, it's a definitive statement about the difference you're trying to make in the world. It's your why. Why are we here? So first off, jettison the generic. I see way too many purpose statements. They're so generic they could apply to any company, or they're so basic that they're just kind of a general category table stakes, so become the company of choice, provide exceptional service, be the most trusted name, and fill in the blank. These are yawners. These are not going to inspire anybody or help you make better decisions. Citibank, I just found them, or Citigroup on the web as an example of kind of one of these yawner generic. I'm not saying their company is a yawner generic. I don't know enough about them, but their purpose statement is certainly generic: to serve as a trusted partner to our clients by responsibly providing financial services that enable growth and economic progress. You can almost see like eyes kind of rolling, or people in that company being, yeah, it's something about being a trusted partner. So try to avoid anything that sounds too generic. You also want to set the how aside, because the how, if your purpose is right, if your purpose is big enough, the how is going to change and evolve over time in response to the dynamics in the marketplace. So your how, your purpose should focus on the unchanging motivation for your business. I do a lot of work with Indeed. Indeed is the largest global job website in the world, and their purpose, we help people get jobs. That is what we do. Now, when they first started, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, how they did that was by having the most comprehensive listing of jobs in the world. So it was a one-stop shop for every job available in the world. So that was helpful at first. Then they realized, well, what would be most helpful would be assessing people's capabilities. So how fast do you type? How fast can you speak these languages? And they do assessments so you can put badges on your resume so that a future employer would actually know that you have the capabilities that you say you do. And today, how they're helping people get jobs is with so many industries being impacted by COVID. They're saying, you know, if you have skills in the travel industry or hospitality industry, if you have skills essentially in dying industries, here's how you could pivot and apply those to thriving industries. So the how changes, but the why stays the same. You want to stay focused, get to the heart of what matters most. Raj mentioned that we did work with Whole Foods, and Whole Foods has this beautiful declaration of interdependence that's basically a 4 or 5 page document that describes their values, their multi-stakeholder model, their approach to doing business, what they believe in. And John Mackey and Walter Robb at the time said, let's try to get this 2-page document into 1 sentence. And it was a brutal process, but we got it to this 1 sentence. With great courage, integrity, and love, we embrace our responsibility to co-create a world where each of us, our communities, and our planet can flourish, all the while celebrating the sheer love and joy of food. Now, every single word in there was deliberated and discussed, and there was a committee, and every president from every region weighed in on it. And there was a lot of love for this statement, but at the end of the day, it's too long, there's too much. And so we went back and kind of wrestled it to, if we had to really distill it down to what's essential, we are here to nourish people and the planet. There's a place for that other stuff, but let's just keep it in the Declaration of Interdependence. You know, if people want to know more, they can learn about it. At the heart of what we do is nourishing people and the planet. Another thing, you want to keep it simple. This probably could last for the last one as well. And go for clarity over cleverness or creativity. This is not a tagline. So eventually a great purpose statement may find its way into a consumer articulated tagline, but for the purpose of clarity, so everyone knows exactly what you're talking about, keep it simple. I'll give you an example of how we evolved. This was an original purpose statement, and let's see if you can guess who it might have been for. To improve the quality of life by lowering the cost of living. And I thought, oh, that's a great alliteration. It's kind of poetic, and quality of life, cost of living. And at the time we were working with Lee Scott, who was the CEO of Walmart. And he's like, I'm not sure my 2.4 million employees around the world are all going to understand quality of life, cost of living. Could we just say it like Mr. Sam said it? Which in his final words, when he was asked about his legacy, he said, I hope I saved people a little bit of money and helped them live a little bit better, which is kind of the very simple way of saying this, a little bit more clever alliteration. So we call it kind of the make it so simple a 5-year-old could understand it test. And that's been their purpose now for the better part of, I think we did that one in 2006. Next is aim high. This should be a lofty and noble goal you're capable of achieving when you're at your best. So we did a purpose project for all of higher ed. There's an organization called the American Council on Education, and whether you're a community college, a public university, a private university, an Ivy League, they're all part of this. And they said, what is the purpose of higher education in America? And what we came up with was at our best, we are here to transform lives for the betterment of society, one student, one discovery at a time. Now, I had to present that to a crew of about 40 college presidents and chancellors, and the conversation just eroded because they were like, well, sometimes we transform lives, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do breakthrough research, sometimes we don't, but we make an effort to give people useful skills for operating in the world. And they treated their purpose like a white paper that needed to be critiqued at the most brutally rigorous level. So fortunately, I had a Jesuit priest from Fordham who said, I know a thing or two about inspiration, and this is what we should be doing. This is what we should be striving for. So again, when you're at your best, this is what you're capable of. Don't water it down too much with the caveats and we don't always do this. And then lastly, the only temperance to that is don't end up in the ether. You don't want to just have a purpose statement, make the world a better place, enrich people's lives, make a difference. Those to me are the definition of a good purpose, but they lack specificity. So don't get too high. So I'm just going to end with a few good examples. Chipotle is a great example of a fast food concept that was started by someone that said, why does fast food have to be bad? Why can't it be food with integrity? Why can't it be food that's organic, that's locally sourced, that isn't GMOs, that is free of antibiotics? And why can't it be served by people who we treat with dignity and integrity and actually have a career path in front of them? So their purpose is to serve food with integrity. I talked about Disney using our imaginations to bring happiness to millions. We do a lot of work with GE. As I mentioned, we went back to their history of Thomas Edison. They're here to invent the future of flight, lift people up, both literally and metaphorically, and bring them home safely. And then Tesla, great example of one who really is looking at that planetary stakeholder to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. So these are very clear, succinct statements of purpose that I think are illustrative of what a great purpose should be. So how do you actually bring purpose to life? So why do you want it? We've talked about how to discover it, how to articulate it. Now this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the real action starts. So how do you bring your purpose to life? It's kind of interesting. When I started doing this work about 15 years ago, there were a lot of skeptics about why bother with purpose. But today, I would say 90% of executives believe that purpose matters. So those green bars are all people saying that we believe if you have a purpose, you'll have higher employee satisfaction, you'll have greater quality, you'll have better performance. But less than half of people are actually running their company in any kind of purpose-driven way. So there's this drop-off between belief in purpose and then knowing how to actually activate it and bring it to life. So there's a great quote that just kind of summarizes that. When a company announces its purpose, but the words don't govern the behavior, it rings hollow. Everyone recognizes the hypocrisy. Employees become more cynical. The process actually does harm. If your purpose is authentic, people know because it drives every decision and you do things other companies wouldn't. So that's my first point. I think a lot of times when people are on the purpose journey, they think, oh, well, we've got our business and now we'll go over here and do purposeful things, which really is the old CSR model of we'll have our core business and then we'll do some nice socially responsible things on the side. When you have purpose, it should be driving everything. We talk about purpose is a way of life, and life is an acronym for the lens I filter everything through. So you want to look at everything that's on every priority you have and say, will this help us fulfill our purpose? And if it will, great, go all in, all hands on deck. But if it doesn't, you might want to deprioritize it. You can look at what's on your to-do list and say, how could I make this an opportunity to fulfill or support the purpose? So some things that aren't obvious purpose opportunities, but if you are intentional and conscientious and say, well, how could this take shape in a way that would bring my purpose to life? And I'll give you some examples from Southwest in a minute. And then if you're truly committed to fulfilling your purpose, what do you need to stop doing? That's another big thing. So a great example of that comes from CVS, which is a drugstore chain in the US, where when they decided that their purpose was going to be about to help people on their pathway to health, they had to make a big decision. Are we going to sell tobacco products in our stores? And they decided it could no longer live in integrity with their purpose and sell tobacco products. So they decided they were not going to sell them, gave up $2 billion in revenue. Now, making a business decision like that and giving up $2 billion in revenue from a primary product in your stores is a huge testament to your commitment to the purpose. And that's what makes people believers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Southwest Airlines. They are, if you're not familiar with them, they're the longest running, most profitable airline in American history. They actually have 35 years of consecutive profitability, which is a complete anomaly in the airline industry. And Southwest Airlines was started by Herb Kelleher. And for years, we were their ad agency, we were their marketing partner, and we had talked about the fundamentals of what Southwest Airlines was. They were low fares, they were frequent flights, they were definitely known for their culture of friendly people. And at the time came when Herb said, Haley, I think by now people know how Southwest Airlines is different. What I want to know is what difference we make. And so when I started asking people, consumers primarily, what difference has Southwest made, people said, well, because of them, I've had the freedom to go and see and do things I never thought I could do. Because of them, I've had the freedom to run marathons all over the country, whatever it is. So we went back to Herb and we said, Herb, You are not in the discount airline business, you are in the freedom business. And that has been kind of the governing idea of Southwest for about 20 years, to give people the freedom to fly. And now once you have that idea, that needs to be baked into everything. You don't just want a description that's like a rear view mirror description of what you used to do. You want to say, how could we give freedom, for example, to our own people? So one of the first things we did was we developed an internal expression of the purpose for their people and developed 7 employee freedoms. So their own people were free to bring their personality to work. They were free to solve problems. They were free to grow their careers. They and their friends were also free to fly, literally free to fly, as part of the perks of working there. So we developed a way to, and that's a good example of, if you're sitting in the HR role and your purpose is giving freedom to fly to customers, you might not instantly think about your EVP as an opportunity to fulfill the purpose in a new, interesting way, but it takes a little bit of effort, but it can be done. How do you use it to differentiate yourself from competitors? When the industry crashed back in 2008, one of the ways that every single airline decided that they would make up for lost revenue was to charge for bags. Gary Kelly, the CEO, said, you know what? If we start charging for bags, that's going to trespass against our ability to give people the freedom to fly, because $50 bags, $75 bags, people can't fly anymore. So we're not going to do it. Now go find that money somewhere else. Now, the good news is we created a campaign called Bags Fly Free. And when we did that, we had about $1 billion in new revenue. That's a billion with a B. And new revenue from people who left their old airlines and switched to Southwest because they were so moved by the commitment to stay true to their cost structure and their purpose. We baked it into their loyalty program. So Rapid Rewards is their loyalty program that you're free to actually use. You could have 100% of a plane filled with Rapid Reward redemptions, and they have the fewest blackout dates of the year, which again, one of the biggest problems with loyalty programs is you're not free to actually use them on most airlines. There's so many blackout dates and limitations. We do it with product development, business strategy. So when that plane takes off, the inventory is gone. We created something called Ding, which is a little downloadable applet that lets you know one of your favorite cities has a $49 fare that's leaving in 24 hours. So it meets their business objective of optimizing their loads while also delivering freedom to somebody to take a trip that they wouldn't have otherwise taken. We develop promotions like Friends Fly Free. We use nomenclature. So instead of just being a gate agent or a flight attendant, people are freedom fighters, and we don't just launch markets, we liberate markets. So it becomes a part of the vernacular. And finally, we talk about it in the advertising. Ding, you are now free to move about the country. So I give this as an example of, once you know who you are and what you stand for, just about any assignment that comes down the pike, you should look at it from how could we use this as an opportunity to bring the purpose to life in a new and interesting way. VF is another client that I worked with for about 2 years ago. And this is a portfolio organization. They're one of the largest apparel manufacturers in the world. These are just some of their brands that they have: Vans, the North Face, Timberland, Dickies. What you find out very quickly when you kind of open them, look under the hood of these apparel brands, is none of the founders of these brands really cared about fashion. They cared about an active lifestyle, and they actually designed the clothing to help perfectly outfit that particular lifestyle. They cared about the lifestyle. And so we actually developed a purpose statement that celebrated that aspect of who they were, that they were here to power a movement of sustainable and active lifestyles for the betterment of people and our planet. And this was represented a big shift in how they thought about themselves, because they weren't just a fashion company or an apparel company. They now think about themselves as a movement for sustainable and active lifestyles. And they actually see their competitors as not necessarily other apparel brands. If you're an active lifestyle brand, what do you think your biggest competition is? Your biggest competition is the rise in sedentary lifestyles that are happening around the world. People aren't as active as they used to be. Kids aren't playing outdoors. People don't know how to go on a camping trip, literally. So this brought a whole renewed energy to the people at the heart of this brand, going back to their roots and saying, how do we actually help get people outdoors again, living active lifestyles? And oh, by the way, if somehow we are destroying the very environments that we're trying to encourage people to go participate in by virtue of how we produce our products, shame on us. We need to be operate in a more sustainable way so that people have those environments to go enjoy and play in. So one of the first things we did when you have is we created a purpose-aligned brand portfolio. You know, Raj talked about a healing purpose has an aligning quality to it. So this purpose definitely helped. We went to each brand in the portfolio and said, if you don't have an active or sustainable lifestyle at the heart of your brand, we're probably going to get rid of you. We went through a whole M&A exercise. They got rid of about 4 brands that were more traditional fashion brands. We actually started acquiring brands like Smartwool that were more active lifestyle brands. And each one went through the process of really identifying what's their purpose that is 100% aligned with the overarching purpose of VF. Then we also did this through every functional operational area to say, okay, if you're in charge of retail, if this is our purpose, what's your unique role in helping contribute to the fulfillment of that? So in retail, for example, rather than just thinking about dying brick and mortar retail as a place to go buy clothes, could those become these lifestyle hubs that actually inspire and teach the active lifestyle at the heart of each brand? So when you go to a Van store, you're going to find a half pipe, you're going to find a skater community. When you go to a North Face, you might find a meetup for somebody that's going to go hike a mountain that weekend. It's much more about a learning environment around the lifestyle. From a marketing perspective, same thing. We're going to be more in the movement business. Instead of spending money on ads, could we spend money on programs in schools to teach kids the lifestyles that our brands are affiliated with? From a supply chain perspective, they're working on bringing sustainability to the apparel supply chain for the betterment of the workers in the system and the planet. And then just like with Southwest, we actually thought about how do we make an employee value proposition that is in tune with this. So can we power the movement of our people through a sustainable and active life at work? It was kind of funny. I went and I was talking with some employees at VF about the purpose, and one of them said to me, well, I want to know how you're going to power my movement. And so that became the theme of the employee value proposition, powering your movement through a sustainable and active life at work. And then we had different pillars about active career development, having an active work-life balance, having an active and sustainable environment at work. So they compost and recycle and have workout facilities, and then creating volunteer opportunities for people to go engage in these things. So hopefully that gives you a sense of, here's how, once you know what your purpose is, you really want to push it into and embed it in everything. And that's the fun part to me of this kind of work. This real quickly too, I want to talk about putting purpose at the core of your strategy. It's not like you have your business here and your 5-year strategy for growing your business here, and then you've got some purposeful activities on the side. So a great example of that, there is an article that was in the Harvard Business Review. They were actually studying companies that had an annual growth rate of 30% or more over a 5-year period. They weren't actually looking for purpose, but when they reverse engineered, like, what is it that's causing these companies to have this profound growth, they actually found purpose was at the heart of those companies, and that they had moved purpose from the periphery as kind of a nice little maybe branding thing to the core of their strategy. And they put the leadership, the financial investment, and they used it to generate profitable growth and stay relevant in a pretty rapidly changing world. I'll give you one example that they cited from there came from Mars Pet Care. So the purpose of Mars Pet Care is to create a better world for pets. Now, historically, Mars had been a pet food company. And one could argue that nutrition is pretty fundamental for creating a good world for pets, that they need to be healthy. But when they thought, well, what would it really take to create a better world for pets? They were like, well, we probably need to also be in the pet hospital and veterinary service business. So they acquired care facilities for pets. They thought, well, how could we actually be a part of healthy behaviors for pets? So they started kind of a Fitbit for dogs, a connected collar that monitors their activity and their location tracking so that an owner can foresee if there's going to be some behavioral problems. They started a venture studio as a business accelerator for innovative pet products. They started a VC fund for innovative pet partners. They started a Pet Cities initiative to actually help pet cities become more pet friendly and able to take your pets more places. And since they started doing that, pet care has become Mars's largest and fastest growing business division. So again, a better world for pets, it might have just been a nice tagline. It became central to how they thought about the opportunities that they should be investing in and pursuing. That's very different from Nestle Purina, just by virtue of comparison. They had a kind of a similar purpose statement that was just better with pets, but they didn't do anything with it. They just remained focused on pet food. They created a social media campaign, and it was, as this person put it, it's kind of just cheap talk. So if you aren't investing in the capabilities your purpose requires, your purpose statement is what economists call cheap talk. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the centrality of your purpose to your strategy. The next one is kind of fun. Make your purpose blatantly obvious. Like if you have to say it in order for people to get it, you're probably not doing it right. So how would I know what your purpose is? Just by an interaction or an experience with your product or service. ShopRite is a co-op. It's a owner-led grocery store on the East Coast in America. Their purpose is to care deeply about the people in our communities, helping them to eat well and be happy. So how do they do that? So Jeff Brown opened up a ShopRite in Philadelphia in an area that was previously a food desert. People said you can't have essentially a nice store in this kind of ghetto-like area of Philadelphia, but he brought together all the leaders of the community, the religious leaders, the mayor of Philadelphia, school leaders, grandmothers that lived in the community, and said, what do you need for this store to be, for it to feel and be like your store? So everything in there, it looks and smells and sounds like their store. There's murals that are designed by local artists. There are recipes taken from the local community that are served up in the delicatessens there. The playlists are curated by the community. There's ethnically diverse cake toppers. So there's African-American princesses that can be put on birthday cakes. Those are real simple. It inspires and empowers me to eat well. So there's an enormous amount of diabetes in the African-American community. So they have dietitians on staff that'll shop with you. I'm just going to go, I know I'm probably running over time. One of my favorite ones is that it contributes to the overall well-being of the community. One of the things that they said is they have an enormous amount of former felons in their community who can't find employment. So they pioneered open hiring, and about 80% of the people in the store have former criminal records. They are the most loyal, engaged, grateful employees Jeff Brown said he's ever had in any of his stores. And so that solved that problem. The grandmas also said, we have way too many guns on our streets. Can you help us get them off? He worked with the police department and did a gift card for guns program. So if someone turned in a gun, they would get a ShopRite $150 grocery shopping card. So all of this, no one in that community has probably ever seen this purpose statement, but every single one of them, if you had to ask them, would probably be able to deduce it. Okay, my last part. Take a little breath. Sorry, it's a lot of ground to cover, but y'all should all be pretty, hopefully you'll be real confident and conversant in all things purpose by the time we're done. This last one is about measuring purpose. So we all know about key performance indicators that most businesses hold themselves accountable to. We would argue that for purpose to be real, you need to have key purpose indicators. This is a great quote from the CEO of Mars. Performance without purpose isn't meaningful. Purpose without performance isn't possible. So we want to talk a little bit about the dance between these two. Southwest, of course, they have key performance indicators, but if they're going to be in the business of giving people the freedom to fly, they need to measure, are they actually doing that? So their key purpose indicators are the percentage of the populations that's actually flown. So 15% had flown when they started. Now it's 95%. They worked with the Department of Transportation to look at the increase in air travel as a result of them entering the market, and it's about 20%. It's called the Southwest effect. So they look at that. They look at the frequency of travel of their customers versus the industry standard, and are they giving their customers more freedom to travel than others? And yes, they are. So those are some examples of how Southwest measures their purpose. Walmart's another one. They're in the business of saving people money and helping them live better. So they actually look at their impact on cost of living. And if you live in a household in a Walmart trade area, your average household spending goes down by about $3,400 a year. And they just ask people, do we help save you money and help you live better, as part of their A&U studies. Unilever is another exemplar in really being diligent and systematic about how they measure their impact. Their purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. They mapped their sustainable living goals to the Sustainable Development Goals and came up with 3 big goals. They want to improve health and well-being for 1 billion people. They want to reduce their environmental impact by half, and they want to enhance the livelihoods of millions of people. And if you go on their website, you can look at very specific goals that they're very transparent about monitoring and tracking. So, and then when you see their annual report, of course they have their KPIs, but they'll also look at what is their goal and how far have they gotten? What is the progress they're making, whether it's environmental impact or livelihoods. So, and as a result, they've had great, those sustainable living brands grew 69% faster than the rest of the business and delivered about 75% of the company's growth. But they're very clear. It's one thing, I think one of the biggest things I've learned in the last year is the power of having a great KPI, key purpose indicator, to really drive engagement around the purpose. Somehow having that goal and that measure that you're held accountable to unleashes an enormous amount of energy and commitment to the purpose. So when you have your purpose in mind, definitely be thinking about what's the most meaningful thing that we could measure in order to assess the impact that we're having in the world. Okay, y'all are probably totally sick of hearing me talk. I hope that gave you a big grand picture of the power of organizational purpose. You're going to be moving into your breakouts now, where you're going to talk about these 3 topics. And the first is just why purpose? For you, what's the most compelling reason for embracing a higher purpose? Would also like you to talk about that meaningful impact. What problem are you solving? What's the biggest problem you have the wherewithal to step up and address with your organization? And then if you have clarity of your purpose, how are you measuring it? What's the most meaningful thing you could do to measure or track your purposeful impact in the world? You don't have to cover all 3 of these in your breakout session. You can let the group kind of let the conversation go where it wants to go, but these will be the topic areas, at least for your consideration. And so I hope you enjoy that conversation, and I look forward to rejoining you here in a bit and answering any questions that may have come up during this presentation.
Thank you so much, Haley. The presentation was perfect, and I bet a bunch of us would like to see the video again and to see the slides again, because yes, there is a lot of useful information. Thank you, Haley.